Hey, all. How's it going today?
4 hours of work and then it's my weekend. I'm sorry. I am a little bit excited.
Yeah, I mean that's something to be excited for. It's always the weekend's always always an exciting time. Right on. So just to follow up with some of the things we discussed last time, it had been asked if I could get like total number of replies and average number of replies on the metrics dashboard. I did get those added on there. Luckily, it wasn't near as difficult as I thought once I figured out how to make the dashboard look right. That was the most fun part about that. But luckily, I talked to Ilya for about 30 seconds. He went, "Oh, click these three things," and I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So I'll go ahead and share my screen real quick and just kind of go over what we've got for that. Cool. Hopefully, you're seeing the dashboard now. So what I've done is separated this out into all the regions, which is the first tab. And then we've got EMEA numbers and percentages, and then APAC number percentage, and then EMEA number and percentage. And the way that basically works is numbers are just the raw numbers. So some of the replies, and then the average replies per ticket. And then percentages put that into what percentage of our queue was these various categories. But yeah, so I've got this now where each one of them is showing the total sum of replies for all the tickets of like the various categories, and then the average number of replies per ticket in that sum of tickets. So just looking at this, September 2020 for authentication for, was this a mayor? There was a total of 84 replies sent on those tickets. On average, each of them had 3 agent replies. It's not counting internal replies. It's not counting end user replies. This is just agent public replies.
So does not also count automation?
No.
Does it?
Yeah, this is counting automation.
Okay.
Unfortunately, for some of it, it is counting automation. That's just because I'd have to add in a bunch of exclude these tags, and Zendesk has pre-built stuff for the sum of replies and the average number of replies. So we'd be looking at having to build whole new calculated metrics just for that. The way I see it, including the automated replies, actually will probably be a benefit for us, since once we kind of get to the point where we're estimating how many agents we need and stuff like that, we would overestimate how many agents we need, which feels like a way better problem to have than underestimating how many agents we need.
True. It kind of depends on what percentage are automated, though, right? So
yeah, and I mean,
yeah. So we just need to maybe be able to counterbalance that aspect of it somewhere down the line. If everything is under 10% or automated, then there's no worry. Then you're taking the right approach, in my view. So
yeah, and I'll work with Ilya before our next meeting, just to see if he can help me figure out how to get that in there, to see if it drastically changes the numbers, or if we're looking at, yeah, it slightly modified them, but the average replies are pretty much the same kind of deal. But yeah, so we've got each of the regions, and then the all region has all of them, and then this nifty little chart at the bottom, which will let you kind of see the average FRT and NRT. The average FRT and the average request or wait time for each of the categories over a 3-month span. It's excluding the current month just because the month's not over. So what we were seeing on all of that data was it was doing its thing, and then this month would drastically drop because we're not all the way through the month. And you can click through the various categories, or if you really like confusing yourself, you can click all of them like that and then not, in my opinion, be able to read very much. But yeah, so this is kind of just getting that on the metrics. Stop sharing there. Feel free to look through that, but I think it'll be something useful to us as we start kind of trying to figure out some of the bigger questions that we need to answer process workflow wise. Any questions on those? Cool. The other thing I did was we had talked about making a process document, which was essentially just a Google Doc for us to start trying to answer some of these process workflow changes. I've got that in place. I put down some of the basic questions that I think we talked about wanting to answer, and I tried to answer some of them myself, just using like my own kind of, this is my thought process, my logic. I think going in detail of discussing this stuff would be beneficial to us. I think that's probably what we're kind of left with figuring out from this stage is We know the barrier to getting this kind of to go live fully is the training aspect of closing that gap between sauce and self-managed. We know that Ronnie and Wei Ming and VG have things they're doing to help with that. So I think what we want to kind of get prepared and ready is great. How do we answer some of these questions that we're bound to get on day one, or even maybe day 50 and stuff like that? So I think kind of going over these would be a good use of our time to kind of try to figure out, here's what we're thinking is our first iteration. Here's what our logic is. And then we can kind of start playing around with figuring out what documentation is needed. What do we need to update? How do we communicate this change out? Stuff like that. I think that all starts with figuring out the questions that we've all asked at some point throughout the area of focus meetings. I think if we can at least answer our own questions, we'll be in good shape. Cool. So before we start going to that process document, any thoughts, any ideas, any concerns, any of that fun stuff? Cool. So I'll kind of go over the questions, and what I'll do is if I've answered it, I'll say what my answer was and explain why I thought that way. And then I figure we can discuss and figure out if, we like, oh, we don't like that, let's try something else, or yeah, that sounds fine, move on. The first kind of thing I figured is determining the number of agents per category. I feel like, especially for managers, that's going to be a big overall question of, right, so we've got this thing, how are we going to make sure we have enough agents per category and all that fun stuff? When I looked at this, honestly, what I saw in my head was, yep, this looks like a math formula. That's honestly kind of how I tackled this. So I kind of put two different formulas in place. One is, okay, so if we use a baseline metric like 5 replies a day, this is what it would look like. The other one, which I at first thought was nice and then actually did the equation and went, oh, that doesn't look as nice in my opinion, is trying to say, okay, we want agents to have this many number of solves a day. And honestly, what I ended up doing is, the numbers look great. We need way less agents to do number of solves a day. We're also then expecting agents to do a ton more replies a day. It doesn't feel very good. It feels like it's a burnout inducing thing. So using the baseline of like 5 replies a day, which I feel like is a pretty achievable, goal, it would basically be the sum of the tickets for the last quarter, and then the average number of replies for those tickets for the last quarter. And then you divide it by 5 times the number of days in a quarter, which luckily that'll be kind of our constant of, take 365.2425. If you're not familiar, that's the actual mathematical number of days in a year. And what that is that's how it equates to leap years and leap seconds. It's really weird, but and essentially dividing that by 3 tells us that's the average number of days in a quarter. The reason we use an average number of days in the quarter is things like the things like quarters with February are really weird on number of days, but like the ones that have November and December in them, those are going to be ones that have 2 days that have, December and January have 2 days of 31, 1 day of 30. So it's going to kind of bounce. So using that, this is the number of days mathematically divided by 3 is a good way to do it. Now that I'm saying that, that should be divided by 4, shouldn't it? Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I was trying to determine if you were talking about three months in a quarter or 4 months in a year, but there's 4 months in a year or 4 quarters in a year.
Yep. So that actually should have been divided by 4, which will make my math equation slightly wrong on this, but I think it's okay because the overall numbers from my math will at least kind of demonstrate the point I was going for. So to use an example of this, using the AMER CI/CD. So if somebody like Ronnie's like, how many people do we need doing CI/CD tickets? We can take the number from the previous quarter. I used fiscal year 21 Q4 because most recent quarter, hooray. And kind of looked at that and said, okay, so in total, there was 357 tickets. The average number of replies for that was 3.67. And that's taking average replies for the 3 months and then dividing by 3. And then dividing that by 5 times the number of days in a quarter. So what I came up for that, and math's going to be wrong because I used 3 instead of 4 for the days, but essentially we need 2.15 agents, and they're doing 5 replies a day in that queue. The reason I say we need to think that through is, right, so that'd be somebody in CI/CD doing 100% of their time needs to churn out 5 replies. Obviously, if Ronnie's like, oh, we're going to have Cynthia do CI/CD and auth, right? Well, then she's not probably not doing 5 replies in CICD. She's probably doing, on average 2.5 in each category or whatever.
Have you accounted for weekends in that?
Yes. So technically that would somewhat be accounting for weekends. But that would be accounting for weekends. Admittedly, I'm not quite sure how to bring that into the calculation. Maybe that's just a simple fact of if we say, okay, well, a quarter is, 3 months and that's 4 weeks a month. So it's 4 times 5 times 3.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is certainly there are responses done on weekends. I mean, we know Greg works on weekends. We know some folks work over the weekend, that type of thing. But there's a traditional sort of 20 or 22 work days per month that models use. So you can work that into a quarter and what that might be, whether you choose 20 or whether you choose 22. My view is it gets to be good enough, right, and close enough. The other question I have is around the 5 responses. And does that need to be more variable based on the type? Or are we just using kind of a level set across all ticket types? So for example, is 5 responses sufficient for a CI/CD issue, and is 5 too many for a SaaS account issue, as an example?
I've been looking at ticket baselines quite a bit with my team lately because I've got people doing all the current 3 areas of focus, and they are wildly different. So my self-managed people, it's about 21 to 22 per week, whereas my SaaS people, it's more like 80 a week. So it is actually wildly different depending on the type of ticket you're working on.
But is that 80? I mean, but what's the comparison by per ticket sort of thing, right? So folks that are working SaaS are 80 responses, but they might be 80 tickets, whereas your self-managed might be 80 responses on 4 tickets, right? So
yes,
that's
sorry, I thought we were just talking about responses rather than.
No, I'm trying to figure out from an area of focus perspective, right? Is what's the granularity? So, and that's when we can be very general, or we can try to be a little more, I think, general on the days and a little bit more variable on per area of focus. What's the average or median or whatever you want to call it, right? Or not what you want to call it, but what you want to calculate, because obviously they're very different. So
my thought process was basically it's 5 replies on tickets in that category, not necessarily the same ticket. Maybe it could be 5 different tickets. Maybe it's 2 on one, 2 on another, 1 on one final one. The reason I just did it kind of general of 5 replies is what I kind of used with the average number of replies of, okay, if on average it takes 3.67 replies per ticket for all the tickets we got last quarter for CI/CD as the example, that would mean on average, that's how many replies each ticket needed to close out, be solved, no more replies needed on it. So using that as kind of a number, if everybody did 5 replies a day, that would mean just using the 3.67, they closed at least one and got another one basically 2/3 of the way done. Is kind of how that would equate out to.
Okay, so I get it. So the 3.67, 2.33, that is accounting for the type of ticket.
That's
okay.
That's solely this ticket itself. So what the 3.67 is just the average replies for CI/CD. The reason I think we should do it that way is if we just took, this is the average number of replies for every category. Some of them require way less replies to solve, like sauce account, but account for a huge chunk of volume because there's a lot of them. So what I think we'd end up seeing is we'd end up having our averages would look a little weird, and it would be not valid for some of the harder tickets that do require more. And the best way to look at that is CI/CD needs 3.67 average replies, sauce account needs 2.
Jason, and will it change too much if we use the mode instead of the average? So we can get the most frequent number of replies instead of the average, because it might allow any outliers to modify the number at some degree. Just an idea. I don't know. What do you think?
So I know statistically, and that's using pure statistic logic of mathematics. Statistically, on a big enough scale of numbers, your mode and your average should be within a very small standard deviation of one another. I don't know what they are in this case. I can try to figure out how to get that in Explore, but I'll need to work with Ilya. I think the number should basically be so close to one another that it's not going to really influence our overall numbers on this if we use this mathematical equation to figure this out.
No, I was just saying. I just said if the data is not that scattered, so it is fine. But it'll be interesting to just have a quick look, just to make sure, because otherwise it will be more beneficial to go instead of and not with average by default. But
I would agree with Jason though. At the scale, it shouldn't, like, the different types of averages should not really make too much of a difference. And I don't know that it's worth spending the time trying to figure out how to pull mode or median as opposed to mean out of Zendesk for these numbers. Jason, one thing I want to comment on is, first of all, I agree. I think number of replies is better than number of tickets, because as you say, like, some of them, some of them can be quite long, and then the average number of replies obviously varies depending on the category. In terms of the number of agent replies per day, I was looking at the baseline dashboards that Ilya had created. I mean, it was quite a while ago, but he created it for the support responsibilities page. So I'm just taking a quick look there. I think we might need to adjust the numbers a little bit because he uses a fixed number for, I don't know exactly what number he uses for, oh yeah, it looks like he's actually just doing a sum of comments and then dividing by a fixed number, which I assume is the number of agents, but that obviously hasn't been updated in a while. So take these numbers with a grain of salt. I'm just going to quickly share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So from this section on meeting the ticket baseline on our responsibilities page, there's reports for self-managed and .com, because this was only meant to be an example. And then
we'll be there
you were supposed
today.
Yeah, you're supposed to take a look at those to actually look at the baseline. So average public comment, this seems actually quite high for self-managed, because this is saying, like, basically you're looking at 28 to 32 public comments.
That's per week.
Oh,
Per
that's
week.
per week.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
per week.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, right, per week.
And the baseline is calculated at 80% of the average.
I don't think. Is baseline? Oh, if you've been looking at this, Jane, then obviously, it's 85.
85, sorry, my bad.
Yeah, okay. So if we divide that by 5, then yeah, that would be like 5 a day. What's weird about .com is that .com accounts and like SaaS and SaaS accounts were not separated in this graph. So it's a lot higher than it really should be if we're looking at something like that. So I, like, just taking a look at this, I would rather use the self-managed. I would generally want to use the self-managed numbers. Otherwise, we could pull, like, specifically for maybe LNR and for SaaS accounts, because they can be quite different in nature. We might want to pull numbers specifically for how many replies as a baseline we expect per day for those two.
Just as a sanity check, looking at the stats you've got on that table, Jason, that middle column, APAC license subscription, is that for Q4 of last financial year?
Yeah. For all of those, it's using the last quarter because
Right.
that's just the one that was.
So
I figured
that's
like I could pull like, oh, let's pull 5 years. It's like, nah, let's go ahead and use the one we would like. Putting ourselves in the shoes of, okay, we have to pick these numbers. We'd use last quarter to figure it out.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. I was just checking that my assumption was right. So that is saying that we needed 8 agents a day to service that area of focus. Am I right in that? That's what that's saying?
Yeah, assuming each of them was doing 5 replies a day.
Right.
For
So just,
L&R, we were saying we needed basically 8 agents, and that would have equated to just the tickets created during APAC. That's how many y'all would have needed to just handle those exact tickets.
Right. So just parity check on that. We have 2 FTEs, and I don't think we're missing enough SLAs that, I'm not sure that our formula is, it's a parity check. I'm not sure that our formula is appropriate at the moment.
So I think what helps L&R is y'all don't, as L&R does not use preferred region, like just because it may say a preferred region of APAC, right? But L&R is going to kind of get responses as they get responses for it. So I think in those cases, it might be being balanced out by just the global team is working L&R, not just APAC is, specifically only doing that. I think it's also important to note that license and subscription doesn't necessarily 100% mean just L&R view. It also includes things like CI/CD minutes, as an example. Basically, it's anything license and subscription related. So it's a lot of that is L&R, but some of it is not exclusively L&R.
I'm sorry, Cindy, but do you see the disparity though that Jane's pulling out, right? If they've got 4 times as many that the metrics say we need versus what's reality happening, then we need to figure out the adjustment. And then
having worked L&R myself and having worked with those people working those tickets, they're doing more than 5 replies a day. I guarantee it. I don't even need to check the metrics to see that one. I can guarantee you that like Rotenok is doing way more than 5 replies a day. And what I think, according to the numbers, looking at just the mathematical side of that, means that they're taking more than 5 replies a day, means they're helping to account for the lack of agents. But to me, that also could be an indicator of, right, that's probably why L&R feels so high stress, is they're having to do the work of what would be 8 agents amongst 2 of them, if we're wanting to say 5 replies a day is the baseline.
But I do think that there's an L&R baseline dashboard too somewhere. I actually don't know where it is.
I just refreshed that handbook page today, so the link will be there. It's just a pipeline still.
Okay. But I think, we've always recognized at least that the SaaS account and L&R tickets are different in nature in a lot of ways than the other areas of focus. And so I think for calculating how many replies per day we expect out of account and L&R specifically, we should be using different baselines than SaaS and self-managed.
I fully agree, because like looking at this, like 5 replies baseline makes sense on things like CI/CD and authentication, where they're very technical tickets. It does not make sense on SaaS account tickets. I could very much see someone like Jane not being happy with the performance of somebody who's like, I did 5 SaaS account tickets. I did 5 replies in SaaS account today. It'd be like, so what'd you do with the other 7 hours of your day? So I could see that what we might need to do is figure out the baseline per category. Just looking at that, I think that's kind of what I wanted to do with just the math equation. Was if we went with set values for pretty much everything we could, which in this case, the only static value really is, the number of replies a day. We look at it like that, and I think it helps see the disparity that Jane and, Cynthia are pointing out of, right, it's saying license and renewal needs 8 people, but we definitely don't have that right, they're probably also doing more than 5 replies a day, which is accounting for that. So we might want to say, oh, well, L&R, we want 10 replies a day, which kind of changes the numbers of, changes the values for that. Because then instead of, just being number of working days times 5, it's right for that one, it'd be number of working days times 10. So it'd end up being 600 instead of 300, which would drop that down, just doing math in my head, to us needing 4 agents instead of 8. So I think we will have to kind of figure out what those baselines for each category will be, because I think it helps illustrate with the math of, doing static values for the number of replies per category doesn't make sense if they're all the same, because 5 replies on a SaaS account ticket, that's 2.5 tickets closed, but 5 replies on CI/CD is 1 and maybe a half ticket closed. So they're very clearly differently weighted.
Jane, sorry, could you just, do you have the link handy to the L&R baseline dashboard?
It's in Zoom chat.
Thank you. Jason, do you know how to clone an existing dashboard in Zendesk Explorer? Can I do that?
Just up the top right, you go save as new.
Yep, Jane beat me to it. It's
Sorry.
weird. Everything else in Zendesk is called clone, except Explorer. That one's called save as.
I have a create new query. I don't think I have a save as.
Oh, you may not have a save as, because I think you can only create personal.
It's fine. I was just thinking it would be good to clone the .com one and then change it so that we keep one for SaaS and then we use the other for SaaS accounts, and then we'll have a baseline for those.
Right on. Post meeting, I'll see if I can't figure out a nice way to clone that and maybe help out with that, or figure out why you don't have the access to do that, because I'm pretty sure your role is with Explorer, so you should be able to do that. Unless it's just a simple, like, you don't have access to that data set and that's why, and which point that give you temporary access to it, and then you can clone it and then I can set it back to how it should be or whatever.
Sure, we can figure it out later.
Cool. So it kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, sounds like we're not necessarily upset with the idea of using an equation to figure this out, but it does seem like we kind of need to tweak like the number of replies baseline per category. Okay.
So yeah, I think aside from SaaS accounts and L&R, we could probably use like a combination of the SaaS and self-managed baselines, and as like to look at what we should be using for the other focuses.
I'm curious if the interest is to understand how many people you want in the focus. The idea should be, what is the extent of replies per focus area? Right? If you generalize too far, you're going to get the same number of people for the most part in ratios, right? And so if you really want an idea of, what's it take from this area of focus versus this area of focus in self-managed, so self-managed in these areas, there's SaaS in these areas, then you need to do it in that range, not SaaS self-managed. That'd be my perspective. Otherwise you're gonna probably get just kind of an equal distribution.
Right. No, I wasn't saying that we shouldn't use, so we should use the average number of replies required for a ticket based on the data that Jason has pulled in the dashboard for our group. But in terms of the number of replies an agent is doing per day or week, I think using the self-managed and SaaS, excluding SaaS accounts would probably be, because I think Jason is using more or less the self-managed ones right now, which I guess would work generally, but specifically for SaaS accounts and for LNR, in terms of the number of replies an agent can do per day, we should use different numbers for those, just because we know they're less technical. But in terms of how many agents we might need in any given area, I do think we should use the average number of replies per, like for each area of focus, have a different number based on the metrics that Jason has pulled. I hope that wasn't too confusing.
Well, I'm thinking of it more in terms of, we have this model that just kind of distributes, let's simplify it, distributes based on tickets created, right? And it distributes people into regions so that we have APAC, AMER, EMEA, and we get a distribution of people. From my perspective, this sounds like we're building it bottoms up to say, these area focus need this many people in these regions versus a percentage of the people that our broader model says we need to pull together. And I'm a bit concerned that they're going to come way out of balance, right? And so the question is it a ratio of, in this set of tickets for this particular region, we get more CI/CD, we get more SaaS, we get more this, whatever. And so we have to have our ratios different in a particular region, or do we have, do we have the same ratios, although they may be varied, right? 10% CI/CD, 5% this, 10% this, in different regions. I'm just trying to figure out what it is we're trying to outline. Is it, do we have the right areas of focus? Are we trying to do a staffing model based on areas of focus? Are we trying to help regions understand what number of people they need in their area, in their particular region? Or are we trying to help them understand what percentage of people need to be readied on an average basis by areas of focus in every region? Right.
So I optimistically think the answer is yes. I think this helps illustrate how many people we might need per region. Maybe there is an understaffing issue that this will help illustrate. But I think also B, like you said, it also helps illustrate, hey, APAC, I'm noticing y'all get a lot of off tickets. You should have this many agents per whatever dedicating 100% of their time to that, which probably would equate to X percentage of your current staffing. So what you would want to do is make sure people are getting trained on that and ready for it.
And that's why I think of it from a percentage perspective. I don't think of it as a staffing perspective, because I think in the staffing perspective, we will be very likely overstaffed and over budget. And that'd be my perspective, go down that route.
Yeah, and I think as we go through this, it's one thing we'll kind of want to look and play with is, should this be a percentage per region? Should it be agents per region? Or do we need to look at this as a global sense of things? The reason I kind of with the math went with per region is it's all well and good if we say, hey, yeah, we need 20 agents, we need whatever, 10 agents working CI/CD, but it does APAC no good if 100% of them are in AMER. So that's why I was kind of looking at it as like a per region standpoint of, right, that way tickets created during APAC aren't having issues because there are people in APAC who can work those tickets.
But that's why I think you come at it from a global perspective and allow that model to be used in region to help be more granular by region. So, but from a model perspective and from where we see from a global, ticket effort, ticket volume, alignment with the areas of focus, alignment with SaaS self-managed, we look at it from a global perspective. Because from my experience, the more granular you get, the more extra bodies you have, and it ends up being a very expensive model.
I know that last time when we looked at it, there wasn't a significant difference between the percentages of tickets in an area from one region to another. So I think to try to like not make more work for ourselves is to start with just the global numbers and say we need this percentage based on the global numbers in each area. And then we just say, take that percentage for each region as well. So, you know, if you say, okay, overall, we need, you know, maybe 50% CI/CD. I mean, that's probably way bigger than it needs to be. Say 20% CI/CD, that's probably still too big, but you know, then we can say, okay, well, 20% of what resources you have right now in each region should generally go towards CI/CD. Because I remember looking at it, there wasn't much difference in terms of the percentage, at least, of tickets that we were getting from one region to another for an area, for each area of focus. There was maybe a 1 or 2% difference.
Yeah, that's where I was going as well, Cynthia. For the few years I've been here, we've gone from a kind of a, was it 30-30-40 split to a more of a 38-38-24 split of tickets created by region, right? And so it's getting closer, but it's still, you know, heavily focused in EMEA and AMER, and then a quarter of the tickets get created in the broad span of APAC times with overlaps in both directions. So yeah, I think what you're going at is globally, how does that split look as an areas of focus perspective, not in a tickets created perspective? So that's an underlying layer.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that using just the percentage of tickets based on the volume is also a way we can kind of tackle this, and it's way simpler than trying to explain this math to somebody. Especially since I know there are people who will see a math equation and shut their brain down. They're like, nope, no math, don't like math. So I think if we just look at it based on like the percentages from that dashboard I made of, right, 24, like Cynthia said, 20% of all our tickets are CI/CD. So each region should have 20% of their SEs focused on that. I think that's a good way, an easy way to look at it. But now I'm seeing Cynthia grimace at the idea.
No. I just have one thought, is that because doing it like, you know, we talked about doing it by percentage. Do we want to do it by ticket or replies? If we do it by replies, then I think we do need to weight LNR and SAS accounts a little differently. So that's the only thing, is I still think we should probably take percentage of replies, but then that we need to somehow weight LNR and SAS so that it's a lower percentage of the total resourcing that we need.
Yeah, I think let me use kind of what we've talked about here to figure out a slightly different equation, essentially, but one that's using, this is the percentage of ticket creates, but also finding a way to weight each ticket based on the average number of replies. Because I think that's basically what you're talking about, Cynthia, is right. So each one's coefficient of, for lack of a better word, coefficient to solve is different.
Right.
The coefficient to solve a SAS account ticket is lower than a CI/CD ticket, or et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah,
I think we can essentially use the average number of replies required for the quarter, turn that into basically a coefficient, and use that with the percentages to say, right, this is what the actual percentage accounts to. Just because, like, if CI/CD is 20% of our tickets, right, but if they take 30% of our time, we want to make sure that we're allocating that correctly.
Yeah, so I think if you take number of replies, but even kind of if you take it as a coefficient, I think you could even lower it a bit more for LNR and SAS because of the number of replies, like how quickly you can get a reply out for those. So just something to think about as you consider a new formula. Anyways,
and
we can talk about that outside of the call.
In an attempt to make your brain hurt, when you start talking about timing, right? A reply isn't a reply isn't a reply, even in 5 replies, right? One could take 15, one could take 2 hours, right? So at that point, you start then taking into consideration the length of time to actually solve a ticket. And I don't think we have the granularity to understand that particular place or that particular element. So everything will be a as good enough estimate as you can kind of imagine. But when you start talking about number of replies, you have to start thinking about the number of times, and that's the weighting factor, right? 10 replies may be an hour if a customer is responsive enough. So
yeah, I'll pair with Ilya next week because he's really good with all that metricsing stuff. See if he can't help me figure out a way to essentially put a weight to each kind of ticket. Because like you're right, Tom. I might be saying, right, CI/CD needs an average of 3 replies to close. Right, but each of those replies probably took an hour, whereas the 2 sauce account replies that were needed probably took minutes. So let me take a stab at that because I don't want us to have to spend all our time talking about math. As much as I would love that, I feel like we probably don't want to do that. So the areas of focus as we have them now from the support YAML, what would happen to that? My thinking is those would be replaced by this. Instead of saying, oh, I'm SM focused or I'm sauce account focused or whatever, it would be, right, we're going to change those to your CI/CD focused or auth focused. And then our team page will kind of generate differently to show that. Does everybody kind of agree with that concept?
So Cynthia's, well, like maybe it was one of Cynthia's fingers, but I thought it was her hand. Go up. Is that what is that, a thumb, or was that a wait?
That,
no?
yes, that was the thumbs up.
Okay, thanks. That was small, very small. Yeah, there you go. What was I gonna say? Yeah, before I got so rudely interrupted by myself. Okay, yeah. So two things I was gonna say. One is I think there, just as an FYI, when you talk about Team YAML, I think there's an effort underway to kind of get Bamboo tied into certain areas of truth, single source of truth for areas of skill from an engineering department perspective. So down the line, that might be something we look at. The second thing is multiple. So hey, this will allow us to have multiple areas of focus that people align to, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Awesome.
Depending on, each SE and what they talk with their manager, maybe Jane's got a new hire and he's like, oh, I want to take 3 categories. She's good. And she might reply back with, let's start with 1 and see how you do with that. So I think it'll kind of vary.
Cool.
If somebody like Cynthia's like, I want to take 5, I wouldn't challenge it. If someone who it's their second day is like, I want to take 5, I'd be like, I'm going to challenge you on it. I don't think you get that's a bad idea. You're going to split your time, might be a hindrance to you.
And I think,
Cool.
sorry, just very quickly, I think right now we allow like onboarding being an area of focus right now too as well. So we can take that into account when we're, looking at percentage of, so someone like once they actually start, even if they only have one area of focus, isn't technically necessarily 100% of that area of focus. They would be potentially onboarding 60% and then, doing an area of focus 40% of their time or something like that.
And I think like the simplest answer for how to factor onboarding into all this is you don't. We assume a person who is onboarding is not contributing significantly to what we would call our requirements for each category. What that does is it doesn't put any pressure on, Joe Bob, who is onboarding, to get ramped up fast enough to actually start doing an impact. It allows them to focus on onboarding. From what I recall, and I don't remember who it was I paired with, but somebody is looking into I think it was Ronnie actually looking into how long the average onboarding process is. I think something like that will be something we can later factor into this of, hey, yeah, on average, it takes 2 months. Cool. That probably means we should just not account for onboarding new hires during the course of a quarter. If it's like, oh, yeah, on average, they're replying to tickets in a week. Cool. We probably should account for them. But I think that's something we don't have to quite focus on yet. Cool. So next one was, do we need metrics centered around performance instead of categories? Should it focus on number of replies are solved? I just put, based on the above conversation we just had, yep, they're not the same. We need to keep each one and kind of calculate it slightly differently. Kind of what should our experts to learning ratio be? Because the idea here is you could be in an area of focus, but not necessarily an expert. Maybe you're learning, trying to get better at it. I would honestly advocate for like a 1-to-3 ratio of 1 expert to 3 people learning. And I think the reason for that is it makes pairing sessions small in size, which I've noticed makes them more fruitful. I've noticed when you have 1 expert and a company's worth of people who are needing help, it puts a lot of burden on the expert and a lot of stress. But I think that's honestly something that maybe we don't even need to really factor in.
I think the only thing we need to factor in is when we look at the percentage that someone who is learning is obviously not going to be as effective as an expert. So if we need, I don't know, say, again, let's just take 20% because it's an easy number, right? And then we have, 15% being like, or even 10% being filled in by experts. Then the other 10%, if they're learning, then you can't say it's like one person doing 10%, just random numbers here. So 1 expert is enough for 10%. You need 20%. Okay, how do you get the other 10%? Well, you don't immediately get an expert out of nowhere, so you need learners, right? And so how do we account for that? If we want to just take a really kind of light approach to it, we could say, oh, a learner is on average, depending on where they are in their learning process, half of an expert. So then to fill the other 10%, you need 2 learners. I mean, we could just kind of guesstimate that way, like a learner is half an expert.
Yeah, and I think like that's basically what we'll want to do is I think guesstimating and in my experience, overestimating is the best way to kind of go about that. Because like if we say, oh, we need exactly this much and we've got learners and experts, but the learners aren't quite hitting the numbers that we predicted, we're going to fall short. We're going to have a backlog. We'll have breaches, blah, 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 blah. So I think it's best to kind of overestimate, or in this case, I guess the right term would be underestimate the performance of a learner. I think that'd be the right terminology to use on this one because we're saying they would perform less than an expert. So underestimate the performance of a learner so that we have to overestimate the number of agents per category. I think that's the right way to say that. Yeah, I think if we need to get to that level of granularity, we can. I think by the time this is said and done, we won't need to do that. But I think as we kind of flesh out the numbers and all that, we'll figure out if we need to. Cool. And so I put a thing about what do we do about a sudden flood of tickets coming into a category that was unplanned? And I mean, my honest answer to that is, well, what do we do now? We deal with it. I think stuff like Crew and or SLA Hawk or whatever the various regions are using, I think that's what they're good for, is they'll be able to jump in and help with unexpected flood problem, unexpected volume. And I think said volume will impact our decisions on the next quarter and help us balance that out.
I will say, like, as someone who, is still obviously working the queues every day kind of thing, most of the time you get a flood of, it can't happen that it's not this, but most of the time, the first big one that kind of comes in, or the first 2 that come in, it starts becoming obvious that it's either like an S1P1 bug kind of bug for self-managed, or it's an incident for .com, right? And when you get that flood, usually you have at least a small team dedicated working on it. And at the end of it, there'll be a known issue. And, so I think I think, like you say, Crew and just having a team of people, I think is usually enough because they're fairly short term. Like I say, usually at the end of in some period of investigation, it becomes a known issue and there's usually a known workaround.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with that. Like a sudden flood of issues is going to be something we're going to see as a problem. We'll tend to have people, I mean, normally, honestly, when I see a sudden flood of tickets, it's almost like a CMOC kind of situation of we're discussing it, a macro gets made, issues get pointed to, et cetera, to the point where the initial part of the flood a little more difficult to handle, but by the end of it, it's like, right, we're almost sending the same response because it's always the same thing. So honestly, I think in that case, it's like, I think the way we're already working towards sudden floods of tickets or issues or whatever already kind of covers that. Cool. Next ones I kind of looked at was the number of categories per agent, and this would mean how many areas of focus can one person have. So speaking just on the Zendesk side, 6. You can't have more than 6. You won't see all the views. It won't work. So at least we know the technical limitations of it is 6. That's the max you can be in at one time. My honest opinion is at that point, you're dividing yourself up pretty hard. And I don't know that you'll actually be able to dedicate an even amount of time to 6 various areas. And I say that because, like, if we go back to that number of 5 replies, 5 replies per day, if you're in 6 categories, you're definitely not replying to one of them. At that point, you're averaging less than a reply a category. And it's probably like, right, how much are you actually helping in all 6 of those categories? I think we'd want to determine maybe a maximum. And honestly, I think once we kind of get the numbers to figure out what we're looking at, it'll help us. But my gut feeling is no more than 3.
I'm going to say 4 if one of them is SaaS accounts and or LNR. Because we know those are less technical. I would say 3 technical, and you can have 1 additional less technical. The other managers can tell me if my feeling on that is wrong, but that's what I would say.
Like, I would honestly almost say 2 technical and 1 less technical would be a better answer for that one. That way, I mean, the less technical one will not take much of your time to send that 1 reply a day, and then the 2 replies to the more technical ones.
Actually, sorry, I should revise. I should say 2 technical, 1 learning, and 1 non-technical. Like absolute maximum, though. Like that, I would say that's the absolute maximum. Is 2 that you're kind of focused, considered an expert in, 1 which you could be learning in, and 1 which is non-technical or less technical.
So my fear there is 25% of what you're doing for one category is as an expert. How effectively are you helping the learners? And that queue, if only 25% of your time is as an expert.
Right. Like I say, this is an absolute kind of maximum that I can see someone effectively doing.
Cool. Yeah, I think we'll just kind of need to look at the numbers that we eventually get from our equations and all that, and kind of look at that to be like, yeah, that'll help us determine what percentage of the team's needed, how much do we actually have to divide that. And I say that because AMER is a huge team. We may not have to divide up, might not have to take as many multiple categories. APAC's smaller though. They might have to take more categories than other teams might to divide themselves up.
Correct me if I'm wrong, even if we've got nobody in an area of focus, it doesn't mean those tickets aren't getting worked, because we've still got people potentially using the self-managed and SaaS views, right? So,
well, those are going to be combined. Like we're not going to keep separating SaaS and self-managed, but yeah, like thanks to things like the SLA Hawk or the response crew and stuff like that, just because no one in a region is an expert or focused on that category doesn't mean the ticket's getting ignored. Like, at the end of the day, yeah, the SLA breach, things about to breach are still the biggest focus. So like at the end of the day, just because maybe APAC's like, we can't dedicate anybody to CI/CD doesn't mean the tickets aren't getting worked. It just means no one's focusing the majority of their time on those specific tickets. Cool, so the reverse of that is minimum number of categories. 2.
Which, based on what we just said, could actually be 0.
Right. Yeah. So like, honestly, I don't think we need to worry about a minimum. I think that will be a per SE per manager basis kind of deal. So let me note that per manager / per SE basis.
Generally say you should have at least 1, because we are typically expecting people to have something that they've opened a training module in and that they're learning. So I would generally say the expectation is that you have at least 1, which is 1 that you're learning in. but not necessarily that you have any that you're an expert in. And obviously that will differ for those who are still onboarding.
Yeah, honestly, I would say, like
I'm not
James
saying
said,
like
in theory it
people
could be
have
0.
to.
So yeah, in theory it could
There's
be
just
0.
the
So
expectation.
I think that's the sort of thing that can be handled at the one-on-one level with a manager.
Yeah.
Those expectations, the onboardings. I'm really cautious of not being overly prescriptive on this.
Yeah.
You know, if we say, right, we have to have 3 here, 2 here, 1 here, 6 here, it's like, really? What happened to our flexibility?
Yeah, I think
I'm just cautious about that.
Yeah, I think we don't need to be too prescriptive about this. I think offering the flexibility is important here. Cool. So how often should we, basically now we come to the rotation period. And I think these are actually pretty easy to answer of when do we need to rotate, look at the categories and determine rotation. Well, if our equations are saying quarterly, the answer is quarterly. If we're looking at, volume for the last year, then it would be in theory yearly, but I feel like there's no way we're going to go a year with 0 changes happening to experts and learning and all that. I would say in general though, like, I want to change. Talk to your manager. You and your manager can work it out, kind of do that on a per basis. Let the manager and the SE have the flexibility to do that. I think that's the best way to kind of tackle that.
I think maybe what we should do is to have a process to like build a kind of a maintenance process, right? So that one or more managers would review quarterly, like what is the percentage? Has it changed? Do we need to kind of encourage, people to learn or develop in this area? So I think in terms like Jane says, I don't want to be too prescriptive in terms of when people can change. Like you say, talk to your manager, that kind of thing. But I think it would be worth building a process where we're reviewing quarterly.
I agree. And I think it's these are the factors that would influence the changes across individuals or teams or whatever, right? And just try to list out some of those factors. It could be people moving into different teams, could be people leaving, could be different percentages of time or tickets or help new security options come in, right? And we have to add. So all of those things could be factors in how things adjust for you all.
Yeah, I agree. And I like what Jane said about it. If we get too prescriptive on this, it's going to make the process harder to even maintain. If we're like, no, you have to equate to this set in stone equation or formula, I think it's good to kind of let it be fluid, but every quarter have maybe senior managers or whatever, whoever it is that wants to review the percentages and just make sure, hey, I'm noticing this shift. We might want to make sure we have a shift of people focusing on that as well. Or, hey, it looks like we're killing CI/CD tickets way quicker. They need less replies now. Maybe we can allocate less people to that, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think it'd be good to have somebody like kind of, do a review like Cynthia said, and then maybe publish that to the other managers and be like, here's my thoughts or my hypotheses or whatever. Because I guarantee you, if there's numbers and metrics, someone's going to want to do it. Cool. So yeah, and my honest vote is if they want to change the area of focus categories, shouldn't impede it as long as it's not causing a major coverage issue. Should be fine. Generally, it'd be one of those handled per manager with, manager SE kind of level. That way, if Cynthia's like, I don't want to do CI/CD anymore, all Cynthia's manager needs to do is make sure that's not going to cause a huge problem in CI/CD. And if it is, then the question then becomes, great, what can we do to enable Cynthia to leave that category without hurting the team? And I think that's kind of what managers are supposed to be doing, is figuring out how to remove that roadblock. But I would say we shouldn't put like, you absolutely can't change per quarter, because I think if we do that, what we're going to end up seeing is no one wants to adopt something and guarantee they'll work one specific type of ticket for 4 months, 3 months. Cool. The last questions I've got on there, I'll leave open-ended so we can fill out async, and that's, what documentation would we need to update? What workflows do we need to update? The answer is either a lot of them or very little of them. But we'll kind of figure that. I think we'll figure that out once we get everything, all our processes kind of figured out, and we start going to the process of let's pre-document this stuff. We'll see what needs to be updated. Iteration says we don't have to worry too much about what needs to be updated. We can update as we go.
Can I
To a
just
degree.
combine these two sections because I don't know how to, in my brain, differentiate between workflows and documentation.
Yeah, go for it. I have no preference on that matter. I separated them out at first, and then, like, as I just said that, realized I just combined the two of those anyway, so I should have just done that to begin with. Well, cool. I would say async for our next kind of task list. Look this over. Maybe if you have any thoughts, put them on there, kind of help fill out what documentation stuff you might think of. I'll pair with Ilya to figure out how maybe I can metrics it a little better. And next time we meet up, I think we'll be able to kind of go over it again and be like, we agree on this. Let's go ahead and commit this as our answer to this, and then start working out our official, like, this is what it'll all look like document. And then we'll have that to be able to go to the manager, the rest of the team with of, this is what we're thinking. This is what our timeline looks like, which is this period of time is to close that sauce self-managed gap. This is the period of time to, fully implement this thing. Because obviously part of implementation is closing that gap. Sound good to everybody?
Yep. Time up.
Awesome. Well, then I'll go ahead and stop the recording.